Chuck Kubik, welcome back to Jacksonville.
Good morning. It's good to be back.
We brought some good weather. Hopefully you brought some good news. We are rejoining our audience that we were here before a year ago, almost a year ago, when we
That's
had
right.
the country club visit. We had over 100 guests curious to hear about Benghazi, the beginning of the story, when it was just starting, really the public starting to find out more about it. So here we are, June of 2014. We're 2.5 years after the event happened, right before the election. And we'd like to remind the public that we had an event that is finally catching on in the media. And I saw the National Press Club interview that was sponsored by AIM, and it had 2 CIA officers. It had you and Admiral Lyons, and it had the author of a book that's coming out. Perhaps we can start there and say, since that's the last time that maybe someone's heard about what's going on, bring us up to date.
I'd be happy to, Wes. And again, I'm thankful to We the People for continuing to keep this story in the forefront. And it was actually a contact that I believe that you gave me, with the Citizens Commission on Benghazi, that allowed me to introduce myself to them and to pass my story on to them, because as you know, had been telling what I knew about Benghazi, and even deeper about some of the events that happened at the beginning of the Libyan revolution that are part of the deeper whole story of Benghazi, but wasn't getting anywhere. And when I finally was able to speak with the Citizens Commission, I found that they had also done a lot of research on their own, and much of the information that I had helped them connect a few more dots. And so we were able to go towards the end of April. It was April 22nd, the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. There were 5 of us, and put on a fairly in-depth press presentation. It was about 1 hour of presentations and about an hour of questions, all of which is on their website. So if your viewers are looking at the details, including a number of white papers that were prepared, it's www.aim.org/Benghazi. But basically, we were taking our time there to educate the press on the deeper story. And as I said there, the deeper you go, the dirtier this story gets. In particular, looking at events that had happened at the beginning of the revolution itself that were precursor events to Benghazi, with the idea that not only did we need a select committee on Benghazi, but that committee could not stop with just investigating the videotape narrative. They had to dig much deeper.
So Trey Gowdy is the most recent news name that's come forward, being appointed by Boehner for this select committee that you were hoping would come to pass, and now
Right.
it has. Where do we stand on that? Congress returns today back into session. Is it going to begin this summer?
Well, I believe so. And by the way, we're all delighted, that Trey Gowdy is going to lead this investigation. And it's curious, Wes, that it was, I think, really about 10 days or so after the press conference that the Speaker decided that he needed to have a select committee. So I'm really appreciative to AIM in their quest to provide the facts, because I think it played a big role in actually pushing the Speaker to take this step, as well as some of the conversations that came from the White House, after there about the videotape. But what is going to happen here, and what we've been stressing, and I've been personally stressing to the members that I've spoken with, is we need to set politics aside. Right now, this needs to be a serious investigation. This needs to be one that looks at documents, that not only has witnesses, but takes their depositions, under oath in private. This doesn't need to be a show for the media up on the Hill where people can filibuster. And so I think that what Trey Gowdy is doing now is he's assembling a very good staff. If you looked at the members that have been appointed, particularly by the Republicans, these are serious former prosecutors, serious defense attorneys, people who know how to handle an investigation like this. And oh, by the way, his questioning won't be limited to 5 minutes per the rules of the House. They'll be able to go into depth, ask follow-up questions. They'll be able to examine and cross-examine witnesses and put together the facts because, and I think he said it very eloquently, they're going to lay the facts out for the American people and then let nature take its course. What happens once people understand the facts. And so what we've been doing quietly is providing as much information as we have to the committee. My sense is that he will spend the beginning of the summer requesting documents. Hopefully he'll get the documents. If not, there could be some court battles over that. And taking depositions, and my guess would be it'll probably be August time frame before you'll see your first hearing.
Senator Kerry was originally going to be interviewed in the other committee that Darrell Issa has, the Government Oversight Committee, and then they dropped that and deferred that Kerry would now be interviewed by this committee.
Yeah, and I was happy to see that because the purpose of this committee is to pull together the efforts of the other 5 committees. And Darrell Issa has done an exceptional job in his role, but then again, he's limited by the rules of the House. And so had the secretary appear before his committee, there would have been the 5-minute rule. There would have been back and forth by both sides. We never would have gotten to the crux of the issue. And by the way, we know Secretary Kerry was not Secretary of State when these events occurred. And so his role really comes after the fact in following through on the investigations, in providing the documents, in making the witnesses available. So in many respects, it was not really, in my judgment, the appropriate time for him to testify either.
Okay.
We need to give him the benefit of the doubt. Is he going to cooperate, with the investigation, or is he going to stonewall it?
So does Hillary Clinton factor in, since she was in state at the time of this event?
Absolutely, and I would fully expect, Trey Gowdy to ask her to appear before the committee in closed session and take her deposition prior to that, and possibly an open session as well.
Okay. So the public being bombarded by these multiple diversional tactics, it's well known that they consider politics to be the driving force. That's
Right.
the media message. This is
Right.
a politics issue. How damaging can this be to the public right now in their perception of a midterm election that's coming?
Well, again, it's really funny because you watch, the Democrats say that this is all about Republican politics, and then you see the Republicans saying, well, these are just the Democrats playing politics. And politics is going to be a part of it, and I think it's going to be a consideration in the midterm election. But really, I think it really is telling that the issue is, are we going to allow our government to abuse its power, and are we going to allow them to keep the truth away from the American people? That is the underlying issue, and I would hope that Trey Gowdy's investigation brings forth the facts, lays them out in a nonpartisan manner, and lets them speak for themselves. And I think when they do, my sense is that we're going to find that there was some very bad stuff that happened, not only before Benghazi, but at the beginning of the war there, that is going to put some people in jeopardy of criminal prosecution. And what it would seem to me is what we're looking for in this is, where is John Dean? Where is someone who's going to look at this and decide that what they did was wrong, and they must now, as true Americans, come forward and tell their story? And I think once the pressure gets put on some people, may not necessarily be people at the top, but others will come forth, and tell the truth, and they'll tell it in a way where the politicians can't back away from it. For example, it's a completely different story, but it's still related to telling the truth and not abusing executive power, is the story of Private Bergdahl. You know, when it came out and people are posturing on both sides, and then you saw those 6 soldiers on TV. All of them have gotten out of the Army. All of them had their own way of dressing and everything for that interview, but they were just speaking the simple truth. There was no spin. There was no equivocating. There was no reluctance behind what they had seen and heard, and no matter what people tried to do to put a political spin, these guys were just talking facts, and they were very, very powerful. And that's what has to happen in this select committee. Facts will speak for themselves.
The committee will be followed by interim, or they do a lot of discovery work, as you mentioned earlier.
Right.
Sometimes the deeper depositions, et cetera, reveal more. How do we, the people, find that out?
Well, I think that this is part of what came out in the interim report by the Citizens Commission. It was titled "How America Switched Sides in the War on Terror." And it talks about the actions by the President, by the Secretary of State, by our government to basically support actions of the Muslim Brotherhood, and in doing that, aiding and abetting terrorist actions. And this is the deeper, darker story. As I related to the press on that day, I was personally involved right after the cruise missiles were launched into Libya in March of 2011 in negotiating a truce between battlefield commanders to discuss the terms of a permanent ceasefire in which Gaddafi would abdicate and a new interim government followed by elections, would take place. And that came about by people in Libya who contacted me because of their knowledge that Gaddafi was ready to leave. There was no need to have a major war, to be bombing, to be hitting their bases with cruise missiles. And is there something I could do as a retired admiral who knew the Libyan people and knew the situation there to facilitate that? So I called some of my contacts at U.S. Africa Command in Stuttgart, was put into touch with their Combat Operations Center, and talked to one of the lieutenant colonels there who had previously been an attaché in Libya, knew the Libyan generals, and he was basically the action officer for any discussions with the Libyans, and basically proposed this concept that we would keep the politicians out of it, we would keep the diplomats out of it, but we would have a battlefield discussion between opposing military commanders under a white flag of truce, pursuant to the laws of war. And we would do this in the framework of a 72-hour ceasefire. And during that period of time, the bombing would stop, Gaddafi would pull his forces back from the city, and we would then have observers from the African Union come in to ensure that the truce was honored. And the only details to work out would be, would the meeting between General Carter Ham on the U.S. side and General Abu Bakr on the Libyan side, would it be held afloat in Tripoli Harbor on one of our one of our warships, or would it be held ashore in the former U.S. Air Force Base at Willis Air Force Base, where there was plenty of room to bring a plane in and to be secure? So that was being worked out. We actually had a request from Africa Command that Gaddafi show that he's serious. They were very interested in this, and if so, would he pull back his troops and lower his guns around Benghazi? And he did. And this was on the 21st of April. Later that afternoon, there was a phone call which I had facilitated between the generals who were closest to Gaddafi. The most senior ones didn't speak English, so they had a brigadier general who was the translator with Africa Command to go over the 4 points of this ceasefire, which I had helped draft for the Libyans, and they read word for word.
They didn't change it?
Didn't change a word.
Wow.
Because they wanted something to be able to brief the senior people. And I had given a copy of it to Africa Command, and they received it word for word. And then after that, that night, General Carter Ham went on NBC TV, April 21st, 2011. I'm sorry, March 21st, 2011. And he, amongst other updates on the war, he stated unequivocally that the U.S. was not targeting Muammar Gaddafi. And that was his, sign of good faith. And so and all Gaddafi had signaled was that he was looking for two conditions as a part of this ceasefire and abdication, and one was that his forces would be left intact to be able to still battle the al-Qaeda terrorists that were in his country. He didn't want them to take over in a vacuum. And number two, that he and his family and his supporters would be given safe haven, and so these were reasonable terms. We came to work on the 22nd of March, and I got a call from Africa Command Combat Operations Center, and they told me, and I was expecting to negotiate where we were going to hold these discussions and when, and they said the deal is off. And I said, what do you mean the deal is off? And they said, we're not going to go forward with it. And I said to the Lieutenant Colonel, I said, I need to talk to General Ham to make sure he understands. And he said General Ham was supporting it, this was above him. And I was back in the U.S. at the time, and I said, I'll jump in my truck and drive to the Pentagon. Who do I need to talk to there? And he said, sir, this was above the Pentagon.
Meaning it came out from the White House? Came
from the White House and or the Secretary of State,
right,
who we found out since was actually in the Pentagon, talking directly to the decision makers there. And I said, I said, well, this is wrong, and what are you going to do? And he said, I just recommend you just let it go. This is above all of us. And we found out that again, a president who had won a Nobel Peace Prize wasn't willing to take 72 hours at the beginning of this conflict to give peace a chance, and it ultimately resulted in tens of thousands of deaths.
And the head of state.
And the head of state on both sides. Well, found out then, this was again March the 22nd. By March the 29th, President Obama signed a presidential decision directive authorizing the U.S. to provide support, necessary support, to the rebels in Libya. Now, he has authority to do that, but prior to that, on I think it was about March the 24th or 25th, he was given a hard intelligence document, which the Citizens Commission has a copy of, clearly stating that the military leadership within the rebel movement were al-Qaeda, operating under the cover of the Muslim Brotherhood. And notwithstanding this intelligence, he gave that directive anyhow in contravention of U.S. law, which prohibits, any sort of help or support. It even prohibits people who would planning or intending to support and not following through with it, 15 years in prison. If you do follow through with the support and as a result of your actions, people die, it's life in prison. And so what we had here was an operation that was knowingly supporting terrorists. We had NATO commander himself before Congress basically admitting, and we have copies of his testimony, that he had seen, documents which indicated that there were terrorist elements, but he just wasn't sure, how solid that information was. Nonetheless, they acted very precipitously.
What's interesting that you brought up here is that this is a misdemeanor, this category on the president. Could that be, as others have said, the possibility of, I saw Drudge had it as a headline this week, impeachment. Is that a possibility?
Well, I think that gets to the issue of follow the facts and again, I'll talk in a minute, follow the money and
Okay.
see where,
That's important.
see where this leads. And if it leads to high crimes and or misdemeanors, then you just let the law, take its course. But it should not proceed with that in mind, in my judgment, because that will then taint, the investigation,
Exactly.
of the facts. And so right now it's important that the American people see this as a factual inquiry, and to the extent that the Democrat members of the committee try to turn it into, something other than a fact finding, I would hope that the chairman now has the power to control that. He can't control what they say when they leave the room,
Certainly.
but he should be able to control the demeanor, the tempo, and the final presentation, of these facts. And of course, the minority members can ask questions, but I think he's going to limit them to not giving speeches. That they can ask questions. But yes, but I think you're also going to find that there are other people who are acting in violation of of the law, that are all of a sudden not going to want their lives and their careers to be destroyed, and we'll see people who will come forward, because the bigger crime and then the connection with Benghazi was the arming, of these terrorists. And what we've been able to find out, and there's parts of this in the Benghazi Commission's report, was that there was a legitimate effort underway by civilian licensed arms dealers to provide weapons if that was authorized, by the president, similar to the way we provided weapons to the Iraqi army, to the Afghan army. Most of these are Eastern European weapons, Kalashnikovs, AK-47s, PKMs, things of that nature. And that operation was started. There was even some approvals given, but the approvals were never given to bring it into Libya, only to take the weapons as far as Qatar, and then waiting for any type of direction to bring them in. When you do something like that, there are various checks and balances within both the Department of State, the Department of Defense. There are controls that get put onto the shipment, both from the origin, certifying what was being shipped, the whole way to the end user, and the weapons are tracked with RFI indicators, so that you don't lose track of where these weapons are. Well, what happened after the president signed the decision directive, this commercial deal was, for all intents and purposes, set aside, and then was orchestrated by our government using money from the UAE, using Qatar as the logistics agent, but still having NATO having to approve the delivery, because nothing came in or out of the country unless we had NATO approval. But they were trying to keep their fingerprints, off of it. Mm-hmm. And when they did that, they also did not follow through with the proper controls. These weapons came into Benghazi and were distributed to whomever. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things that Chris Stevens was sent by Hillary Clinton to go to Benghazi to be the liaison to work, with the rebels, and to basically help coordinate these delivery of arms, which went terribly bad, there. Now, we also have information that if that wasn't bad enough, this was a time when Gaddafi's weapons were being attrited, the rebels were just being armed, and the Muslim Brotherhood basically authorized the sale of several hundred million, maybe as many as $400 to $500 million worth of weapons to Gaddafi, so that they could get cash to finance their jihad elsewhere, including Syria, Egypt and Syria. Right. And Gaddafi then was able to fight, because there were other forces that did not want this to end in a stalemate. They obviously did not want this to end in just Gaddafi stepping down. They wanted it to end in Gaddafi's death and in an opportunity for the Muslim Brotherhood to take control in Libya, much as they had taken control for a short period of time there in Egypt. And so when you look at this, you could see the mess that was created. Now, one of the key commanders of Ansar al-Sharia was a guy by the name of Abu Khatallah, who was one of the rebel commanders who received the weapons at that point in time. There was another Libyan general, General Yunus, who had defected from Gaddafi, who was commanding the rebel forces, who found out about this sale. He was furious. And so he came into Benghazi to meet with Mustafa Jalil, who was leading, the Libyan, he was the civilian leadership of this Libyan rebellion. And it was Jalil who ordered Khatallah to have Yunus assassinated. And so Yunus was assassinated coming into this meeting. And roll the clocks forward, the night of the assassination in Benghazi, who was there? Abu Khatallah. We know he was there, and the Justice Department has a sealed indictment against Khatallah, but they didn't pick him up. He was the one who was giving interviews to the press. And you've got to ask yourself, why a sealed indictment, other than the fact that when people start to investigate, they can say, well, you can't talk to him. He's under a secrecy. So you begin to see that the committee needs to get deeper, because if they're trying to find out what happened the night of Benghazi, who were the terrorists involved? Where did they get the weapons? Who is it that was really ultimately responsible for this? It's entirely possible that what we're seeing here is something akin to Iran-Contra plus Fast and Furious on steroids. It's that bad. And again, I don't know exactly what they'll find or how much of this will bear out, but the questions need to be asked. And what I've been doing, is helping through the commission, through members on the Hill, to formulate the questions, to ask. And if we can get honest answers to specific questions without filibustering or equivocating or spinning, the truth will come out. If not, then we're going to see people taking the Fifth Amendment. We're going to see people trying to continue their narratives. We're going to see potential perjury. And then this will get into a judicial proceeding, and it'll get right back into politics, I'm sure. But they have to dig deeper. The whole spin around the narrative of the video is one of the symptoms of a much deeper illness that exists here.
The public perception, I believe, from when I talk to people every day, is that it was a given that the videotape was never a factor in what was really going on in Benghazi, that was a created story, that now the email story has hit the public. It was actually engineered for public deception.
Well, and again, I went back to Tripoli about 3 weeks after the assassination, was talking to friends of mine, and I asked them about the videotape. They said, to this day, nobody knows what this videotape is. All they hear is about a videotape, but nobody's seen it. Nobody knows what it is. Nobody cares about the videotape. And so you're absolutely right that this was an operation. It almost makes you think that story, I don't think it was made up on the fly. It almost sounds like it was planted ahead of time. For some time. But we do know now, the way the timeline has come out, was that while the attack was going on, the president called, Hillary Clinton, and they had a very short phone call, and then a few minutes later she released a press statement which talked about the video, that night before the final attack on the annex. And my guess is that somebody had sent the press release over for an approval, and whether it was approved as written or edited or whatever, that was the final go-ahead. They put the story out. Once that was the narrative, the rest of the State Department White House team just continued to spin the narrative, and now it continues to happen even in former Secretary Clinton's new book, where she's trying to still say that these was information that was provided by the CIA, which we know was not was not true.
Have you seen in your career, as I have in mine, a destabilizing of the administration? I mean, we no longer have the Secretary of Treasury, Defense, State, even the press secretary is gone. Homeland Security, so many key positions that revolved in the first administration are just no longer there. Do we see that historically?
You're talking about different personalities there?
Yes.
I think so. You know, I served in the second Reagan administration and came in at a time when there was turnover, and people turn over for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's a good, safe place to move on with their careers. Some want to go off while their contacts are hot. Some people just get burned out, and in many cases, a smart president on the second term will want to bring in some more energy, into it. But what you have to look at is the qualifications of the people who are coming in. You know, are new people coming in leaving good positions to take these senior governmental positions, or is somebody who's in the chain just moving up or sliding over? You know, my boss in the White House once told me that when you're meeting an official for the first time and you get to learn about them, judge whether they are currently in the best position they've ever had or whether they took a step down to serve. And if they're in the best position they've ever had, be careful. You know, and I think that that's what you see in the second administration is a little bit of potentially, if you're not careful, a watering down of the talent that's at the top.
Well, we respect your time. We honor your service. We want to ask you to come back and give us updates because you have a position now as almost a liaison would, to us, where we can put the message out to our various links. And whether we do it by a radio program that you've been a guest on, or whether we bring you in and have some other presentations like this, we would certainly love to have you.
And the support of We the People. Thank you.